And thank you for inviting me to come and speak today. And thank you to Renata for the lovely introduction of what Suzuki teaching is, because now I know that everybody is coming from the same level of information. I'm really, really concerned about the time limit, so I'm helping myself stay on track, because what I'm showing you today is a very, very thin slice of a much wider practice, and I want to make sure I don't digress. But before I begin, I just want to tell you a story. Once upon a time, when I was a much less experienced teacher, I had a student who had learned to handle slow movement. And this student knew what key she was in, she knew what the harmonic progressions were, she had a big vocabulary of ornamental figures that she had added in other repertoire, and she had lots of audio examples of different performers playing the same movement with different kinds of ornamentation. So, now's the moment. You get to add your ornaments. Nowhere. Very, very reluctant to even try. So we put in a couple of cadential trills, and I said, okay, this student is not ready to tackle this. We'll set it aside. So fast forward some length of time, same student, same sonata. We learned some of the fast movements, and it was time to put it all together and talk about the transitions between the movements and how the slow movement was ending on the dominant and had to lead to the fast, all those things. And I hadn't heard her play this movement for quite some time. And so I said, okay, well, let's play the slow movement again and lead into the fast movement. And she plays the slow movement with beautifully improvised ornaments. And what did I do? Nothing. I just waited. And all my student needed was some time. And I think she needed time to feel safe to experiment, and time to engage in some creative play with what she already knew. And so I said to myself, what can I do for my students to give them time to do this before they get to this point, so that they're already feeling like they're safe to experiment and they're already engaging in creative play with the things they've learned. And what can I do to make my lessons a safe place for experimentation? So at the time of my story, I had an idea about how teaching improvisation was going to work. First step was understanding the structure of the music. Know what key you're in, what the harmonic vocabulary is, what the form is. The next step was to have a vocabulary of ornaments that you could have, that you could fit into different places. And then, of course, once you combine harmonic structure with ornamentation, then you're in the realm of improvising preludes and cadenzas. But where was I going to put the creativity part into this? I was teaching very by the book. I was going by the treatises. So, I'm a Suzuki teacher. And as you've already heard from Yap yesterday and from Renata today, in the Suzuki approach, we use a language learning model to develop an understanding of musical structure, melodic pattern, and harmony and form by ear. So how could I add more creative play into this understanding about how to recognize where you are harmonically by ear? I have had the pleasure to work with Sarah Smolin, who's a cellist and an improvisation artist. And she introduced me to the idea of straight and playful scales. So it's a 4-step process. First of all, you're practicing your scales, but you set the tonic drone underneath the scale. You're going straight up and down, and the kids are hearing the relationship of each note in the scale, so they're hearing the whole key. And then you introduce one little zigzag into your scale. Yeah. So what we're doing by doing this is we're learning how to hear the whole key, not just one note at a time, the relationship of each note of the scale to the first note. Okay. Then we can have a little bit of fun with it.
scale shape, pick one note. And remember it moves swiftly backwards for a few minutes and go back again. So that you're putting a zigzag in the middle of your scale. Okay, so you hold the note and I'll go first and I'll show you what I mean. Now you can do the same.
And then the zigzag becomes more playful. And instead of going in a straight path, you're exploring the landscape of the key. Playfully. You go along D again. And then I can sub out the tonic drone with a bass line. And my playful scale starts to sound a little bit like Divisions on the Ground. And as a Suzuki teacher, I have access to, and my students have access to, a wonderful set of recordings by Marian Verbruggen. And in these recordings, all the ornamental figures are introduced in melodies, and there's a variety of different styles. And there are many opportunities to review all these ornamental figures in different contexts as we go through the repertoire. So, how can I add a more creative play to this so that my students don't get worried about always putting the ornament in the right place? And let's try it in some different places. So, Dalcro's teacher, Jeremy Detus, showed me an exercise, a movement game, where the students do an action to show you that they hear something in the music, sort of like Simon Says. So I created this game where we're working with mordants. And if the mordant goes up, we stand up, and if the mordant goes down, we sit down.
What do you say? Mordant?
Mordant.
Mordant. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Something similar and make these guys hop up and down by adding some extra notes to your labor. Okay, you don't have to do a lot of them, but try in a couple of spots and see what happens.
We discussed that later. Okay. And as I said before, my idea was that if we have a strong sense of harmonic and melodic structure and a large vocabulary of ornaments, we can then create preludes and cadenzas as we do when we study the treatises. But how can I be spontaneously creative with cadenzas? And this is where I have to thank Alice Kanak, who's developed a program she calls Creative Ability Development. And her whole approach is to teach or to develop creativity through musical improvisation. And one of her exercises is called the Cadenza Game. And the students walk in a circle, and they're basically improvising completely freely. We've decided ahead of time what key we're going to be in, but that's the only criteria. And then when the piano plays a certain cue, the student who is in this position on the circle stops and does a cadenza. And everybody else sits back and listens. And the rule is, one of the rules in our classes is silence and applause. So when somebody's doing something, we're all listening attentively, and when they're done, we applaud to show our appreciation. Sorry about the flutes. I teach both instruments, and that class gave me a better example the week I was collecting videos. So we can do this with recorders too. And actually some of our most fun improv classes are with mixed instruments. Okay, so all of these activities take the form of games. Children play games. It's a familiar environment for creative play. And a favorite game that all children play is Let's Pretend. So Alice Kanak harnessed the idea of Let's Pretend into something she calls the animal guessing game. And it's like charades. The kids get into teams, they pick an animal, and then they have to do an improvisation, and everybody else in the class has to guess what animal they are. Okay, so here we have a worm. It's tiny. And a bee. Okay, so the creative improv games is what helps me braid all these ideas that I had about how to teach improvisation together. Setting the rules of our game, choosing the key takes advantage of what the kids already know about tonality. Taking turns teaches them about form, and assigning roles teaches them about how to play in an ensemble. If I add ornamentation to the game, then I'm increasing the complexity of the material, but the game environment is still that familiar game environment that they've been playing since they were this big. And when my students get to the slow movements of Handel's sonatas and I say, okay, now it's your turn, they're ready. It's a safe place and they are comfortable with playing freely with what they do. And I would like to thank all of the teachers and students who appeared in my videos and helped me out with this. And thank again ORDA for inviting me to speak to you. Thank you very much.